Okay, now we're recording and I should actually move on to speaker view. Charles, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you all for having me tonight. This is a great honor to be in this kind of a distinguished bunch of people. As Jez mentioned, I started in movements for social. First of all, I come from a migrant family. My father made similar trips from Eastern Europe to the US just about slightly more than 100 years ago, in fact. And my mother's parents also made that trip from what is now Belarus and Ukraine to New York. And so I grew up with stories about migrants and more or less precisely the same kinds of stories that I'm hearing from migrants today. The same kind of brutality, the same kind of reasons that they left where they were. I remember I grew up in that kind of a neighborhood as well. And I remember one of my first questions as a kid was, Mom, what's that? What's the number on that lady's arm? That sort of stuff. I started working in movements for social change in 1966 with the Sierra Club in New York and with the environmental and the anti-Vietnam War movement. And then in the early 70s, I moved out to Oregon and began to work with the first actions of Greenpeace and had training from people like David Hartsoe, whom some of you may know, in nonviolent conflict transformation. And that's where I became a Quaker, was in Portland, Oregon, and participated in actions of civil disobedience there and so on. And then I just made the wild decision to study medicine, and so spent 1.5 years in Antwerp, and then went up to Groningen in the northeast part of the Netherlands and studied medicine and worked at the Department of Psychiatry for quite a number of years. And when I got out of med school, I started working with what was then called the Medical Examination Group, which was a joint group of Amnesty International and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. And we were working on assisting asylum seekers and refugees to get official status. Because Dutch doctors didn't really want to deal with asylum seekers and refugees then, and I think still don't, because of the amount of work it takes and the amount of, let's put it this way, the trying nature of listening to some of those stories. We began to do diagnosis and treatment of people as well. What then happened was that other groups heard what we were doing and say, hey, can you help? And hey, can you tell us how to work with those people? And so we did that. And then out of that, volunteers came and said to us, hey, we're not getting any education. We're not getting any psychological supervision. Could you guys do that? And so that's basically what we did. Now, just about 30 years ago this year, i.e. 1991, the wars started in the former Yugoslavia. And some of us formed a working group on that. These were physicians, these were social workers, some religious people. And I came down here for the first time at the Christmas and New Year's of 93, 94, and saw that the situation was awful and decided I wanted to do something. And came to Budapest. There was a big meeting of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, what was then called the Balkan Group, at Easter of 94 in Hungary. And the rest is history. I came down here to the Western Balkans in June of 1995, thinking I would be here for 6 weeks, and nearly 26 years later, I'm still here. Yeah, okay. By the way, another explanation for the initials CWWPP is concerned workaholics without a pot to piss in. And that's basically the way we consider ourselves. We're volunteers. We work very hard. We work 7 days a week, basically. Okay, what do we do? By the way, I must say that this has been a learning process, very much a learning process as I've been here. At first, we thought we would just work with professionals and increase the competence of professionals. But what did we find? We found that there weren't enough professionals, and there still aren't. And by the way, in the world, according to a number of articles in the medical journal, The Lancet, more than 90% of people who should be getting psychological assistance are not getting psychological assistance. That gives you an idea of how great the need is. So what have we done? We go back to that experience in the Netherlands, and we think that new groups of people need to be formed. And we call those people barefoot therapists or peer supporters. And what happens? We take people, and I'll describe the method in a moment. It's called Pragmatic empowerment training. We take people who have not had any previous education, and we make them into these barefoot therapists, or make them into them. We gather them together in villages, in other kinds of groups, once a week for about an hour to 2 hours. And the training goes on as long as they want. And why do we say that? We don't put a specific time period on it. Because what happens? They bring cases, and they say, hey, can we talk about those cases? They bring their own personal problems, or issues, I should say, not problems, and I'll come to that in a moment. And so these become places where people can vent, and where they can talk, and where they learn. They are educated. We use the method of Carl Rogers, which is participatory education. That means that we use the experience and the knowledge of the people participating in their own education. They determine what they learn, how they learn it. Very, very important. We have a curriculum that includes an introduction to working with people, self-care, interpersonal and group communication, introduction to psychology and counseling, directed at the specific situation in which people are working and living, nonviolent conflict transformation, civil society, and human rights. But the way we conduct the sessions is we say, okay, what's been going on since we last met? And then people talk, and then we decide on the topic for the evening, or for the afternoon, or what have you. And people talk, and we work it at a very, very local level, but we get to the general principles as well. We're not only because of the pandemic, because also we don't have a lot of money, we're doing a lot of this work online. And we're working all over the world, in fact. Among other places, we're working in Congo, Rwanda. We're working with friends in Rwanda. And in Congo, yeah, at least one person there is a Quaker. We're working in Guatemala since for the last couple of months. We're obviously working here. We're working in the refugee camps in Bosnia and in Greece. We're working in Germany. I'm just trying to think, what am I forgetting? Nigeria? A couple of other places. And we're continually getting requests. We're continually, but very often getting requests. And we're anxious to expand. Not that we have the time. The schedule is pretty tight at the moment. But and people who know me will know this, that I would rather do 10 groups of highly tortured people per day than do an hour of administration. And unfortunately, I have to do both. We run it with 2 people, unfortunately, and Marlies and Baron and Cica know my colleague, Sandra Maric. She unfortunately could not be here tonight because she's with her family. She lives about 20 kilometers from here. By the way, for those of you who don't know it, I'm in the city of Vukovar, which is in eastern Croatia. It's an 8,000-year-old city, very mixed. Before the Yugoslav wars, there were 25 different ethnicities here. We live in a street which is a very mixed ethnicity. By the way, when the restaurants are open, they are segregated. When the schools are open, they also are segregated, even now. And this brings up at least one of the issues that we must consider, and that is the transgenerational transmission of trauma. Because in all of the wars and in all of the work that is going on in the world, we must remember that the generation affected by the specific violence is not the only generation that is affected. There is the transmission that has been shown in extensive literature. And in fact, we're seeing it here. People, the kids, the young people who are in their 20s now are affected by, and even older, are affected by the Yugoslav wars. We're seeing it quite clearly. Unfortunately, there's not been, if we're talking about the local situation here and in Bosnia, not a lot has been done. Not a lot is being done. I've spoken about migrants, but it's also with the local residents here and the local residents in a lot of places. There is just not a lot of psychological assistance around. And that's very unfortunate. And so we do what we can. We think we're at least making a small contribution, not the greatest. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot. We are slowly, very slowly, writing self-paced online courses, the first of which is on the website, because we think that the material is very, very important. And we hope to continue when we get time to do that in the future. We're also in the middle of writing a piece, again, Lord knows when we're going to get it finished, but about lessons learned over the past 25 years. So we hope that it will be out by the middle of the year or the end of the year, but I make no promises because we're extremely busy. We're expecting, and we're seeing it already, additional issues with COVID and the trauma caused by the lack of social distancing. Again, we say that we don't like the term social distancing. We prefer the term physical distancing and social cohesion. That is extremely important. We also do not like the term post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress syndrome. We prefer to use the term post-traumatic stress reactions, plural. That's also important. Why? Because these are natural reactions to, then unfortunately, all too common events. And they are very individual reactions to those events. Yeah, We are very much in favor of self-help groups, also for migrants. By the way, we're open to anybody who from this group would like to have a group. If there's anybody out there who would like this, or who knows of other people who would like it, please contact us. I've made a very quick introduction now, and I think it would be good to ask you guys for questions and using this, what for me is a very common interactive method to get at what you guys further want to know and see what's been happening. So the floor is open.
Charles?
Yes, it's.
You know, we have visited you many times in Vukovar, and we saw a lot of your work, and we cooperated together in giving trainings. And my question is, how do you survive in this situation with all these tensions and stress? I think that's really, I admire you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, this gets into the enormous question of self-care, which is important for everybody working in this field. First of all, people will laugh at the methods that I use, but I am sure to take at least a half hour to an hour a day for myself. That's very, very important, and to do what I like. And you will laugh, but I listen to stupid BBC, detective things, and comedies. I take about 2 hours to eat every day, and I make that into meditation. I have a period of silence in the morning. Just before I go to sleep, I have my specific sleeping pills, namely 50 grams of chocolate. I have my own mechanisms, and I recommend to everybody who is working and to whom we give groups that they find something similar to do. Walking is a lovely exercise. Getting out into the air. I'm exercising, as you may notice, I'm doing now. I have a table from IKEA that goes up and down, and as I'm working, I'm running in place. I talk to people. I have supervision from a Quaker, a guy called Bryn Jones, who is in Wales, who's an excellent psychologist. Supervision and intervision are extremely important. Supervision is when you talk to people about the interaction between your personal life and your professional life individually, and intervision is when you do it in a group. And that, to my mind, is essential for anybody working in this field, in this kind of a field. Absolutely essential. Yeah, and Sita and Marlies and Bernd have met my colleague, Sandra March, who is an extremely lovely person, very understandable. She's been with us since 2006, and our discussions every morning. Sometimes we fight a little bit, I can't say we don't, but we understand one another very, very well. And we react to one another in a good way. And that's essential. That's essential to this kind of work.
You forget your dogs, Charles.
Oh, yes, we have 2 dogs. And we use dog therapy, in fact. It's dog therapy or animal therapy. I see there's a cat as a member of this group tonight, at least one cat. And animal therapy is extremely good as well. They give love, they give attention. It depends. If a person has been tortured by animals, obviously it doesn't work. But for example, we've had some raped people, we've had some abused people who react to animals far better than they react to humans. And that's indeed another way of relaxing. And just walking with the dog is a very good way of getting it out. And another thing I do is I keep a very extensive journal. I get it all out on into the computer. In fact, I'm constantly writing. After this meeting, I will write about my feelings as well. I'm continually doing that, and that helps me. I know other people who draw or who paint. I'm not a great artist, but I know people who do it extremely well. By the way, on the website, there is some art by a refugee guy from Afghanistan who is now in Greece. So you might want to have a look there at his work. Other people do music, screaming, crying, anything, any way of getting your feelings out is extremely important. And that's for us, but it's also for the people we're working with. It's one of the first things I recommend, in fact, when we're working with clients, is that they get their feelings out in one way or another, and that they take the time for themselves. So.
Charles, this is a pragmatic and it may be a stupid question. I have just surfed you on the internet, and your name is everywhere. You just have to put in Charles Tauber. And
I apologize for that.
No, not at all. You do an enormous amount of work. But one question which comes to my mind is, and you may feel insulted in a sense, but how do you fund it?
How do we fund it? Okay.
Pardon?
Okay. This is a sensitive question, but I will.
Yes.
At first, I was literally surviving on very little money, and again, Sitsa and Marlies know it, the legacy of a Dutch friend. And I was literally nearly starving. We then met a friend from Pittsburgh, a man called Paul Warhaftig, who was excellent. He's now retired. And Paul introduced us to the donor who gave us money for about 15 years. And he was anonymous for a long time. Now I think it's okay for me to use his name because he unfortunately died in October. And he was a man called Bob Yeager. And Bob was an exceptional man. Bob had been a Catholic priest who left the priesthood and married a nun. I'm not quite sure where they got their money. They adopted seven children with special needs in the period. We've got enough money now till about the middle to end of 2022. We don't know what Bob's family will do. We're searching for money. One of the problems is that for precisely this kind of grassroots, bottom-up work, especially for mental health, there is not a lot of money around. There, in fact, very, very, very little. There is very, very little money around for migrant work, particularly migrant mental health. Very little money for mental health in general. A lot of the money, and Jez will know this a bit too well, I think. There's a lot of money around for policy work, that sort of stuff. But for the kind of work we do with particularly vulnerable groups, it doesn't exist. So we don't know what we're going to do. The Dutch pension that I would presumably get, and we're working on now, will not support anything. So I may be literally living in my car at a certain point. I don't have a pension. So We shall see what happens. We're hoping that Bob's family or somebody else will continue in assistance in one way or another. But as I say, it's almost ironic because the amount of the requests that we're getting for work are increasing, if anything. Increasing steadily.
Thank you very much.
Does that help, Jeff?
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah. Thanks.
Charles, we also
May I
have
add?
sorry, Charles, we also have a question in the chat, which
I'm sorry.
says, thank you for your talk. How do you manage embodied trauma in those with whom you work?
Oh, that's a very good one. I see that's from Ivan Hutnik. Embodied trauma, wow, that's a big one. First of all, the whole body work, what should I call it, protocol, methodology is a big one. We do a lot of talking, we do a lot of work with meditation, mindfulness, that sort of thing. We have one guy whom I may even see later tonight, who's a very good massage therapist, body therapist, who works with that sort of stuff. I think Ivan is referring to the work of people like Bessel van der Kolk and Pat Ogden and those sorts of people. And there's a whole literature about that. I have done some of that work. We try and get groups to do that. It's difficult work. There's no question on it. One thing that I didn't mention that's very important is the question that this work has to be long-term work. Workshops for a weekend or a couple of days or a week just don't do it. You must be working over a period of years for most of this stuff. And I know a lot of people think, and the international organizations work that way with these short seminars and stuff. They help. I'm not saying they're useless, but they have to be incorporated into a longer term program. There's one woman I'm working with who I now see only about once every 3 to 6 months, but I've been working with her for 20 years. Most of our clients we see for 4 to 5 years, sometimes longer. The groups, the education, so-called educational groups. In reality, by the way, these educational groups also are supervision groups, and they're also therapy groups, because therapy is stigmatized. And it's much easier to come into an educational group and say, hey, I'm getting a certificate for this. And because of the open format that we use, it's virtually every group that we have is also a therapy group. Now, that works very well. And we have found that over the course of years. This is, so yeah, embodied trauma you can do in a group, you can do with, how shall I say, therapists who know what they're doing. And sometimes, as I say, with a group, this guy we know in Split, in Croatia, is very, very good with that sort of stuff. But it's not easy. One of the problems that we see, and I'll come to the, let's see, the chat question, how do you prioritize? Yeah, I'll come to that in a sec. One of the things that is very important, as I say, is the time scale. Okay, let's go over to the prioritization. We can come back to these techniques if you want to. Prioritization. We tend now to prioritize educational groups over, over individual clients. We still, between the two of us, have enough space that we can just about make it. But, and obviously urgency. Example, the Bosnian situation right now is considered to be quite urgent. The Greek situation, the situations in places like Rwanda and Congo are very important right now because quite simply, there isn't any other assistance available. And that's the way we tend to prioritize. Where is the greatest need? Yeah, that sort of thing. Marlies, you?
Charles, could you also tell us maybe a bit about, if you start working with a group, what the process might look like, sort of what's actually involved in the sessions and the, like, where do you start from and where are you trying to go, that sort of thing?
Okay. To answer the second part of it first, we want to go where the group wants to go. Their needs, their desires are what we're aiming for. So each group will have a different kind of goal, depending on where they are, depending on what they exactly are doing. How do we start? We get an organizer in the group, or somebody contacts us, and we have an initial meeting. And we do an inventorization. Who is who? What do they want? What is their background? And it gets very, very diverse. And we start off with a topic, whatever topic they want. And then they take it from there. And at each session, the way we start each session is, okay, what's happened since we met the last time? What do you want to talk about tonight? And that can go anywhere, and that can change in the middle of a session. Very frequently, I must say, we talk about identity. Very frequently, we talk about shame and guilt, because that's very common, unfortunately. Very frequently, we talk about getting out feelings, that sort of stuff. Very frequently, we talk about venting, because people, quite simply, and anybody who's attended Dutch meeting will know that I always talk about this. Providing a safe place. That's very important. Providing a place where people can say anything and everything, and that it's not going to go anywhere else, and that nobody's going to criticize them. And that everybody within the group will attempt to assist and will be empathetic. And that people know that they have at least that hour and a half, 2 hours per week where that can happen. And literally anything can happen. It gets very personal. We have very, very strict rules on privacy with that. We don't reveal it to anybody else without people's permission. We follow, as I said, that's crucial. Does that answer your question, Jeff? Let's see. Can you tell us whether spirituality plays a part in the barefoot therapy? Yes and no. We think that spirituality is important. We bring it up. A lot of people don't. We bring up the role of religion, but we are not of a specific religion, and we do not, how shall I say it? We do not introduce spirituality unless the group wants it. That's very important, aside from anything else, because there have been a lot of attempts at conversion. When I first got down here, there were a lot of, unfortunately, there were a lot of evangelistic groups that were trying to save souls rather than to solve traumas. And maybe that sounds a bit crude from my side, but it happened, and people didn't want it, really. And people were vulnerable. And that gets to be a real problem sometimes with some groups, with some people who do. Viktor Frankl, by the way, does everybody know the name Viktor Frankl? Yes, no? I'll put his name in the chat. Speaks about sense of life. Yeah. Frankl, and we use a lot of the ideas of existential psychology and humanistic psychology. Those sorts of ideas. Those are very, very important with traumatized people, extremely so. And those are the kinds of directions that we go. If somebody wants a meditation session, or if the group wants that, we'll do it. We do mindfulness sometimes. We do one of the techniques that we use and that I use extensively is this whole idea of the safe place within your head, i.e. find a place that you like, that you're comfortable, that you feel relaxed, and you go there whenever you need to. And we use that as a base sometimes for going deeper into highly traumatic stuff. And that can be very important for people, that they have this retreat, that they have this escape. By the way, there was an article yesterday, notably, in the new issue of the magazine Torture, which is produced by the International Center for Rehabilitation Center for the Care of Torture Victims, the IRCT, and this was on migrants on the Balkan route. And it said that over 90% had been tortured. These are staggering figures. And it shows you just how much need there is for this kind of work. Unfortunately, we're seeing that in Africa, we're seeing that everywhere. Unfortunately. And we need more people to do this kind of thing. Very badly need more people to do this kind of thing. Yeah. It's spirituality is very important. Everyone has his or her own kind of spirituality, kind of feeling of what death means, what uncertainty means, what the meaning of life is. That in effect is existential psychology, but it's also spirituality. And it's very individual.
Charles, you were talking about the places where you are having groups. How do you manage the variety of groups?
I just get into it. I let them talk as much as they can. There are some groups in which I don't say a word, I say 10 words the whole hour, or the whole hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I let them talk. And in other countries, it's exactly that. For some groups, for the Congo groups, my French ain't that great, so we have an interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
We've done the same thing on occasion with Arabic. We don't have any Arabic groups at the moment, but we're open to that.
Yeah, and so for example, Guatemala, where you said you work with a Portuguese, no, a Spanish translator?
No, they all speak English.
Okay.
They all speak English. That's quite a group of people. That's a very interesting group. I like them a lot. they're, at the moment, one of their big topics is gender-based violence, which apparently is quite extensive in Central America.
Okay. And do you have any contact with Quakers in Guatemala?
But we're open to it.
Mm-hmm. Because
we're open to everything.
Yeah.
We're open to, as I say, if they, I just saw something on the QARN group that they were asking for some work with volunteers, and just before this meeting, I wrote them a little note saying that we're more than willing to do that. If anybody here, as I say, wants this kind of a group or knows of people in other countries or other regions that want something like this, we're more than willing. If I can't do it, Sandra will, and if Sandra, then otherwise we'll find something. Interestingly enough, yesterday we got a request for internships from 2 Moroccan students from Casablanca, from medical students. So we think we might get them working online or in Morocco. Who knows? We'll see what happens. This could be a lot of fun. For me, I thoroughly enjoy this because it puts, I love working with other cultures. I love learning about this stuff. It's very sad. It's very sad work. And in that sense, the question that we started with is very important, to relax and the whole self-care thing. The writing is very important for me because when I've written this out, it's almost like my scream. It sounds crazy, but it's almost, I scream on paper. Yeah. Yeah.
There's another question, Charles, in the text, which is, how do you work in other countries? So I guess that might be a bit about how do you find it? How does it, what's the nuts and bolts of it?
Oh, I thought I was answering that. I thought
Okay.
I was answering.
All right, sorry.
Yeah.
But is the work, it comes just by word of mouth, or how do people generally find you?
Okay. We're not shy. Let me put it that way. We're out on stuff like Giving Way, on what is called MHPSS, which is mental health and psychosocial support. There's a, we publicize our work as much as we can. By the way, recently we started a series of podcasts. We'll put that out. We're on Vimeo and on YouTube. We haven't, unfortunately, the course is on both Vimeo and YouTube. When we get some more time, we'll make some more podcasts and make more courses. That's our goal. And we publicize as much as we can. Some people know of us already, so, and some of it spreads by word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee is asking, does your work interact with programs AVP and Turning the Tide? Every once in a while we'll interact with AVP. The group in Rwanda said to me today they were doing AVP, the group in Kigali, which we just started last week. We've worked a little bit with Marlies and Sitsa on AVP here. Turning the Tide, I don't know what it is, dare I say. So if Lee, if you could inform me or send me a link or something, I would, we'd love to interact. We love to interact with other groups. We're interacting with No Name Kitchen, which is a bit of a problem because No Name Kitchen sends out volunteers for a couple of weeks or at worst, at best, a couple of months. And that becomes really problematic because what you get into when you get into those kinds of short volunteerships is that you traumatize both the volunteers and the migrants that way, we find. Because they form a relationship and then they break it. And they don't really know how to form those relationships. And so that's a kind of a constant work of ours. We prefer that people stay for a minimum of a year to 2 years if they're going to volunteer. And sometimes we say, well, volunteer where you are, because there's, Lord knows, enough work in Europe even, or the States with this kind of stuff. And again, we sometimes work with volunteer groups in places like that. So, yeah.
Charles, did I understand you well that you support people to start groups or to work with groups?
We do indeed. We don't give them money because we don't have it, but we will indeed give them the mentoring.
But you know, when I would say, Charles, I'm willing to do an AVP course for a group of people online, would you support that?
Sure, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? We could do it together, or and you lead it, and then I kind of sit in.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could do any other kind of support that you would like.
Okay, because you know it's working with people who have the traumatic stress reaction. I like actually the expression that might need special skills to work with the group.
I have no problem, again, coming into the group and working with that group, with those sorts of groups.
Mm-hmm.
Either Sandra or I can do that. We'd be more than happy to.
Mm.
It's a matter of figuring out the scheduling, but that's solvable.
What is it?
I say it's a matter of figuring out the scheduling, but
yes,
that can be solved.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Charles, I'm not quite sure how to formulate this question. Is it all right if I ask another one, Jez? Or
of course. Oh, sorry.
To someone else. In my local city, we have a group of 165 Syrian refugees.
Right.
I'm a member of the City of Sanctuary group in that town, and we know that some of the Syrians are suffering from trauma, but it's not something
quite a large percentage.
Yes, but it's not something they will talk about. And because the Syrians are not I would say a homogenous group, they're very suspicious of one another. It's quite a tricky business to have to be able to draw out the trauma and to discover when it is that they want the trauma to be drawn out. So I'm really asking you, I'm not asking you for how you would do it. I'm simply saying that, you know, it's a problem that we might ask you to address perhaps in the future.
I would love it, Jeff. And what we would do in that case would be, we would ask you if it's possible, and sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. We're working on forming such a group in Würzburg in Germany, by the way. There's one guy whom we know who is kind of on the beginning of forming a group of Syrians. He's Syrian himself. So we would ask you, if it were possible, to find a group of, say, anywhere from 3 to 12 Syrians who might want to get a certificate, have an education, and then they become the therapist. They learn what they're doing. They talk to their own people.
Yep.
And they come back to us for supervision and for further assistance. Once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that. So that would be our first approach if that were possible. is that possible, do you think?
Well, yes, I'll certainly after this meeting email the group and see what we can do. Yeah, very good.
We would love it.
Yeah, yeah.
We would absolutely love it.
Well, we're rather stuck. I mean, the local council is reluctant to get into this business of trauma and mental illness, and we are struggling too. But we know it's something that most of them won't speak about, and they won't speak about it to each other because very often they're antagonistic towards each other. They may have been on opposite sides of the war. It's very, very difficult. Yeah.
I'm looking outside my window, Jeff. We have exactly the same thing between the Serbs and the Croats, even now, even 30 years after the beginning of the war and 26 years after the end of it. So I know what you're talking about. One of the UN organizations once made the dreadful mistake, dreadful in quotation marks, of getting a Serb translator for a group that included Croats. And for anybody who has any idea of the two languages, the difference between Serbian and Croatian is more or less the difference between your English and mine. Or between, say, Dutch and Flemish, something like that. So so I know exactly what you're talking about. It can be very antagonistic, and it can be very stigmatizing. So this is why we have developed a policy on interpretation as well, on who interprets and how. And I can go into that, but that's, yeah. But if you can find people from, say, each of the subgroups, that would be great.
Yeah.
And maybe for the 1 hour or the 2 hours a week, they can suffer one another. Sometimes they can hear what we did at the beginning. And in fact, we still do it, is you work with one ethnic group separately and another. So maybe we would have to have 2 or 3 groups. And we're willing to do that too, for each subgroup. We were very surprised. This was in about 2000. So it was just a couple of years after I had gotten here. When 2 groups, this was in Butchko. I don't know if you guys know where that is, but that's on the Croatian-Bosnian border. One time we were working on both sides of that. One guy came up to me in the middle of a group and said, "We know you're working on the other side." I said, "Yeah, I've never hidden that from you." And he said, "Okay, can we go and meet them?" Well, you can imagine that my mouth dropped open at that point. And we did that. It was difficult. I won't say it was easy, but we mediated that group and it worked. Worked very, very well, in fact. They got together. So.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, let's try it, Jeff. If you can do it, I mean, we're more than willing to assist in any way we can. And if you want to have another conversation, please feel welcome.
Charles, it's Jez again. Can you tell us a bit about, I feel like it's like what you're doing, it sounds really important and valuable, but do you despair because you feel like you're just quite small or you're making this difference to some people, but you can see, for example, the challenges even in the city where you're based, that these huge problems. Do you see a way to see a brighter, a utopian, a better future?
Difficult question, yes. We do what we can. We kind of keep our blinders on and we say something that somebody said to me long, long ago in Portland. you're doing the best you can with the resources you have. To use a Dutch expression, I feel like a drop on a glowing griddle. And, you know, but we're helping at least some individuals. And people are saying that to us. We're getting the feedback. We're constantly asking for feedback. Is my constant question to people is this useful? And people will say, in general, people say yes. And when they say no, okay, we do something else. Frustrating? Feeling powerless? Yes, constantly. Absolutely constantly. We go slightly mad, especially with the world as it is today. And it's dangerous for me. I do it, but to listen to BBC News every morning. But what can I say? We're doing what we can. We're helping at least a few individuals. And you never know how far this spreads. And sometimes, every once in a while, I've been surprised at just how far it has spread. So, yeah, I'm very frustrated. Yeah, and these are these exasperating discussions that Sandra and I have every morning. Exasperating and exasperated. Yeah. So, not easy. I won't say it's easy. Keeping up with the work is not easy. After we finish tonight, I have a load of emails to do. I have to write up a client or two, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It never stops. Yeah.
Charles, what are your group's relations like with authorities or people in power, or do you feel you're so small they don't even really much notice you?
Good question. I'm sorry, you're Liz?
Yeah, sorry, Liz Coling. I live in Prague.
Okay.
And I go to the Prague meeting.
Okay. I was part of what was it called? Central European, the Central European Quaker.
Yeah, the Central European Gathering. Central European Gathering, yes. In fact, I think you came and did a you came and did a session, I think, with it. I wasn't there, but I think
long ago.
Yeah.
Must be at least 10 years, maybe more.
Okay.
Yeah. Relationship with authority, bad. They don't really like what we're doing most of the time, because a lot of the politics around here and in other places is anti-reconciliation rather than pro-reconciliation. I know that sounds weird, but the politics, for example, of Vukovar is very much separation. The politics of Croatia is very much separation, even though they won't say it. Look at the whole anti-migrant policies. Look at what Frontex is doing. We have had in the past some half-decent relationships with the UN and with OSCE. But even the big international intergovernmental organizations are sometimes very problematic. It's all top down. There's very little bottom up, unfortunately. We've tried, I don't know how many times we've tried, we continue to try, but it really doesn't work. Yeah, I wish it did. I wish we could convince some people within governments to react in different ways. Maybe through QCEA, there are people we can get to, or through CUNA or through some other Quaker organization. I wish we could. Even the big non-governmental organizations are problematic. Again, they go for short-term stuff. One rather large NGO, this is about 2 years ago, was in Belgrade, was doing some, at least a little bit of psychosocial stuff. And we said, yeah, we want to work with you. We're more than willing. Oh no, but don't you know the problem in Serbia is solved? So we're going to Bosnia. Yeah, well, grr. I start growling like we were talking about pet therapy earlier. Sometimes people need to get me as pet therapy, something like that. When I start to growl, yeah. I won't deny it. It's not an easy thing. I wish governments were much more open.
Thanks. Sounds pretty depressing.
The whole thing is pretty depressing, quite frankly.
Charles, I have a question which comes to my mind. Of course, we have been several times in Vukovar and we know the situation quite well. You now do a lot of work online. So what does keep you in Vukovar and not going back to the Netherlands, for example?
Okay, first of all, it's closer to the source. It's closer to the source. So we can have, obviously not now, but under normal circumstances, we can have a little bit of personal interaction. I've lived here for 25 years. I'm used to this town, for better or worse. It's an interesting town. I think I would move to some place like Congo or Turkey. We've got a group in Turkey now, too. And we'll probably get another group in Turkey pretty soon, of a very vulnerable group there. Yeah, there's not that much, to be honest, that keeps me here. We have a couple of clients who we've dealt with, but yeah. And quite frankly, I don't particularly feel like living in the West, but that's my, maybe I've just gotten used to it. The Danube is very beautiful here, and it's only about 100 meters away. So, yeah, I think Baron knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I can understand because you can walk daily over to the Danube, which is a very beautiful place there in Vukovar.
Yeah, Vukovar is a pretty town, and it's, as I said, a very historic town.
Mm-hmm. So. And of course, you have Sandra with you, and you would not find a Sandra very easily in the Netherlands.
You would not find a Sandra very easily anywhere. That's how much I'd rather that. Yeah, we've actually been talking about that a little bit. What to do if we have to. If we don't have any money anymore. We don't know.
I understood from, what's his name, Misha from Tbilisi, that he is doing a course with you.
Yeah, he and one other person are doing that, and we're trying to figure out how to do a group in Georgia.
But that's already quite ongoing already quite a long time.
A couple of months.
A couple of months. So is it possible for other people who are now here to join in that?
I see no reason not. Hang on, I'll look up what time it is. It's on my Zoom. Yeah. But I think it's better keeping it to Georgia, quite frankly. If we want to have an international course, let's do an international course. or course group. That would be my reaction. But I think I would like to keep it there, because what we're thinking of there is that they have a lot of IDPs there. Sorry, internally displaced persons from Abkhazia and from South Ossetia. And what Misha and his colleague Mzia are trying to do is to get some sort of group together there. But that's going to take a while, I suspect. But they're good people. Misha has worked a lot in NGOs, and Mzia is a teacher and a social worker, and he's done a lot of stuff. They're good people. But if people feel like getting an international group together, no problem. We can figure it out.
Charles, may I ask the other people if they can help the Dutch Service Committee to support you more than we can do, because we are only a small fund, but maybe there are bigger funds, and or together we can do at least more to support you, and we really want to do that.
Thank you. We will certainly not say no.
And some money.
We would certainly not say no to that. Yeah. Well, especially as we don't know what will happen in 2 years' time, or in a year and a half. So, yeah. And by the way, we will keep people informed. We use both our Facebook page and my Facebook page. We don't really use it for personal stuff. We use it mostly for institutional stuff. So if you want to become quote unquote a friend, either on mine or on the CWWPP page, feel free. And you'll get our updates and see when things happen.